So with the warm-up act over, it was on to the main event, the coast-to-coast trail. A quick overnight in Manchester and we were on our way to the start of the C2C. Once again we would board a Northern Rail service train, this time heading north up the scenic English coast to the small town of St. Bees. A quick check-in at the Seacoast Hotel, and it was time for a pint of Wainwright ale. For those of you unfamiliar with the story, Wainwright was apparently a bit of an eccentric, grumpy, and reclusive man who was most comfortable when he was walking by himself in the fells of the Lake District. He wrote several books on the subject and unintentionally became a bit of a celebrity. It was Wainwright who pioneered the coast-to-coast route, which takes the walker west to east across England from the Irish Sea to the North Sea. St. Bees is a quaint little English seaside town which appeals to families keen for an afternoon at the seaside and walkers preparing themselves for the trail. Tradition has it that walkers are supposed to dip their feet in the Irish Sea and pick up a pebble, which you are to take with you on the journey and deposit in the North Sea upon completion. The day concluded with a quick reconnaissance of the next day's initial climb and a lovely sit overlooking the ocean and the fields. Fortune smiled, and the first day of our walk could not have been a better one. After a brief chat with a couple that were starting the walk the following day, a second stop at the trailhead sign, and Ruth's quick audition for a place in Monty Python's Ministry of Silly Walks, we were on our way. The stunning trail initially heads north up the coastline before veering west towards the fells of the Lake District. Our first day was a modest one, ending in Cleator at the Patterdale Country House Hotel. Although we were self-contained, we had booked a few hotels along the way because, hey, we enjoy our comfort. We'd also decided to walk reasonable distances each day, as we were carrying packs, and let's face it, neither of us are spring chickens. By the way, that's Ruth doing end-of-day stretches. And that's Her Royal Highness Ruth sitting on the throne, preparing for what was to be a great end-of-day pint and a rather posh evening meal. The next day's walk took us through Patterdale Bridge and the hip little locals hangout called The Gather. Good coffee, good treats, and a friendly ambience. What more could you want? Well, maybe a cool water bottle. After Patterdale Bridge, we trundled our way around Patterdale Water on our way to the Black Sail Hostel. Situated at the top of a valley, the YHA Black Sail is apparently England's most remote hostel. Those not booked can avail themselves of the facilities, which we did before pitching up in a sheep bothy a few minutes from the hostel. If it looks idyllic, it's because it really was. Beautiful views, perfect weather, clean, cold running water, and a flat, nicely protected campsite. It was a bit chilly the next morning, but it didn't take long to get the blood pumping. See those little people below us? They accidentally took the low trail, while we took the high trail. It wasn't long before we were into our first steep climb. Success, and time to enjoy the view. The trail then descended down the valley past the touristy Honister Slate Mine before heading to Seataller in the Borrowdale Valley, where we pitched up for the night. As we had left ourselves a bit short on food,
Breakfast of champions.
The next morning started with a truly scrumptious breakfast. a couple delightful English villages, and an obligatory ancient bridge crossing, and we were into the next climb past Eagle Crag and Linning Crag on our way to Grasmere. And while we were both impressed by our timely ascent, the sheep seemed less so. Once over the pass, Grasmere was about a 2-hour walk away. Grasmere marked our introduction to the British Hosteling Association, and a fine introduction it was. The Grasmere Hostel was originally a private house before being used to accommodate evacuees during the Second World War. After the cessation of hostilities, it was turned into a hotel, and in 1958 it was bought by the YHA. The hostel has an excellent camping area, which gives walkers access to all the facilities. Friendly staff and basic but filling and reasonably priced meals makes this hostel a good choice for an overnight stop. For us, it turned into a 2-night stop. Many walkers on the C2C pass through the villages along the route rather quickly. Ruth and I prefer to linger. So much of the enjoyment of a walking holiday in England is exploring these small towns. For the English walker, I suppose this is a case of Coles to Newcastle. But for the foreigner, wandering around the unique little shops and cosy cottages and sampling the food and local ales is a large part of the enjoyment. Grasmere, as you may know, is where William Wordsworth wandered lonely as a cloud, and the town certainly plays on this. Although it does get a bit crowded, one can easily spend a day meandering about the village and around the lake. It really is a delightful place. Grasmere to Patterdale is one of the prettier sections of the walk, especially on a beautiful late spring day. The trail ascends gradually to the picturesque Grisdale Tarn, an ideal place for a rest and a picnic. It then descends towards Patterdale, past the Ruthwaite Lodge, which is locked to walkers, but used by mountain rescue when the situation demands. On our approach to Patterdale, we passed by the cemetery and local church, where walkers who have succumbed to the demands of the trail are buried. I'm actually making that last bit up. The village of Patterdale itself is small and unmemorable, but it is beautifully situated on the shores of Ullswater. Founded in 1855, the Ullswater Steamers Boat Company originally moved mail, workers, and goods between the Greenside mine at Glenridding and the village of Pulley Bridge. Today, its fleet of diesel-generated boats service the tourist trade. Now for a quick diversion from the trail. A friend of mine lives with his wife in their exquisitely renovated farmhouse just outside Sedberg, which is a small town just south of the coast-to-coast trail. On hearing that we were planning to walk the trail, they kindly invited us to stay overnight with them and enjoy, and I stress the word enjoy, a good night's sleep and an amazing meal. Following a night at the Patterdale hostel, Stu picked us up and whisked us away to their not-so-humble abode. Heaven. Made more so by the fact that Deb, who is recently retired, is a foodie and an outstanding cook. By the way, what you see here is just a light little lunch snack. We obviously had to walk it off before the evening meal, so Stu took us on a delightful walk, all the while explaining the fascinating history and geology of the area.
Machinery in there, which they have occasionally got working.
Stu and Deb's farmhouse sits on the southern flanks of the Howgill Fells, which are in the Yorkshire Dales. The following day we would return to the trail and actually walk on the northern side of these impressive hills. But before that, we had to refuel with the evening meal. And as we'd been walking by lambs for the past several days, Stu and Deb thought it appropriate that we eat one.
Good. Oh, yes.
Next day, we were back on the trail and on our way to Kirkby Stephen. From Orton to Kirby, there was very little in the way of services, save for the very pleasant Sundigan Farm refreshment stall. If I remember correctly, the stall was established by the children of the farm's owners to help pay for some of their equine ambitions. The landscape changed dramatically as the Lake District was squarely in our rearview mirror, and we were skirting the northern edge of the Yorkshire Dales. The walking was predominantly open moorland, with the Howgill Fells off to the south. Once again, the weather was with us. Another blue sky day, which is highly unusual on the coast-to-coast trail. Kirkby Stephen gives the impression of being a working man's market town. It has a nice campground and all the facilities a walker might need. The town's central attraction is the very fine 13th century Kirkby Stephen Parish Church, often referred to as the Cathedral of the Dales. Ruth and I took time to explore the church and grounds before setting off on the day's walk through moorland over the 9 standards to the town of Keld. Where are the standards, you ask? On this part of the walk, the trail breaks into 3 separate options, and unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, I misread the map and we ended up on the path that skirts the standards and eventually rejoins the road from Kirby to Keld. Keld is a scenic little town tucked along the banks of the River Swale. Ruckin's campsite is a fine place to pitch up for the night, thanks to the fine facilities and the welcoming demeanor of the proprietors. Keld is famous, or perhaps infamous, for its association with lead mining in the 18th and 19th centuries. Lead mining was dangerous, unhealthy, and unpredictable work, and many a man went to an early grave. Throw in the use of child labor, and perhaps it was not England's finest moment. The walk along the Swale River towards Reeth is anything but unhealthy and dangerous. In fact, on this particular day, it was simply stunning. Beautiful waterfalls, the world's biggest sheep, bit of an optical illusion here, great vantage points from which to observe the Dale, a superb riverside path, and spectacular meadows. We dawdled and arrived in Reeth a bit late, but were warmly welcomed at the Orchard Caravan and Camping Park. Highly recommended. Our initial impression as we walked through Reeth the previous late afternoon was that it seemed like a very agreeable little town. So we decided to stay an extra night and do some exploring. And of course the first thing that we discovered was a good bakery and coffee shop, the Two Dales Bakery, an excellent way to start the day. The town itself sits on a bench overlooking the valley. Most of the commercial enterprises surround the central green, which on this day was filled with cars owing to the Swaledale Marathon, an annual 24-mile fell run. Reeth also seems like a bit of an artsy place. On this weekend, a few of the studios were open for visiting. The age-old dilemma for walkers is, should we do ice cream or pints first? I invariably go for the latter, but today Ruth went out and we had to start with ice cream. But of course, this only delays the inevitable. A mid-afternoon beer on the patio of the local public house. Black Sheep was the day's ale, an excellent choice I must say. The day ended with a stroll to Grinton, with the hope that we might take in a concert at the 12th century Church of St. Andrew. Unfortunately, we arrived a bit late, and the doors were closed. The walk from Reeth to Richmond follows the river for a short bit, and then strikes off into very scenic rolling farmland. A few hours after leaving Reeth, we arrived in Richmond. Richmond is a castle town, but given our rather leisurely pace, when we arrived the attraction was closed. We're not really big sightseers anyways, so we were quite content to wander the streets, getting a feel of the place while scoping out restaurants for the evening meal. Accommodation for the night was one of England's several gazillion buck hotels. Don't be confused, it's not a hotel chain. It's just that many owners like to name their establishments the Buck Inn, or the White Stag, or the Red Lion, or the Red Bull, or the Black Bull. Our best view of the castle was leaving the town the next morning. The next section of the trail was relatively flat. And now we leap ahead a bit. The North York moors behind us, we found ourselves nearing the end of the walk. The trail from Glaisdale to Grosmont follows the very pretty River Esk. But before we could get on our way, we had to stop for a coffee and scone at the Glaisdale Tea Room and Garden. Immediately after Glaisdale, the trail came to the Beggar's Bridge. The story is a bit more involved, but the Coles Notes version is that the 17th century bridge was built by Thomas Ferris so that he could fulfill an oath and marry the love of his life, Agnes Richardson. The trail then cuts through the shady and cool East Arncliffe Wood before exiting at the Horseshoe Inn in Egton Bridge. This is a fine place to purchase a cold pint and a pink dog, and prepare for a nice little game of stepping stones across the river. The route then followed an old toll road into the town of Grosmont. Grosmont lacks a bit of charm, but this is made up for by the fact that it's a station stop on the historic North Yorkshire Moors Railway. The line closed but was reopened in 1973 by the North York Moors Historical Railway Trust. The preserved line is now a popular tourist attraction. As of 2020, the NYMR is the UK's most popular heritage railway. We decided to linger a bit and wait for the steam engine to come into the station. All aboard! The train was leaving, and so were we. Time to get on with it and finish the walk. And before you know it, we were in Robin Hood's Bay. One last little descent down a steep hill, and it was time to deposit our pebbles in the North Sea and settle in for a cold celebratory pint.